In our first lesson, we're going to answer the question, how do I identify the terms in an expression? So we're going to be talking about terms, we're going to talk about what an expression is, but first we're going to talk about what a variable is. If you look at workbook page 165, you can see the definition for a variable is a letter or symbol that's used to represent a number. And you're probably already familiar with variables because we actually worked with them in Unit 2. In Unit 2, you worked with variables in area formulas. For example, in the formula for the area of a triangle, A equals 1/2 BH, also known as area equals base times height divided by 2, the letters A, B, and H, they were variables. A, the capital A, that stood for area. The B, that stood for base. The H, that stood for height. And what we did was we had to figure out what the base was, what the height was, and we substituted them back in for the variable. So the variables were taking the place of the numbers that we used for the base and height. We're gonna write another formula that includes variables. So you may be familiar with some other area formulas, maybe just something as simple as area equals base times height. We use that for rectangles and parallelograms. We also had, don't forget the trapezoid one, that was a big one. Area equals, we had height times the sum of base 1 plus base 2 divided by 2. We also talked about surface area. Remember surface area? We can use SA, two variables. Was 2 times length times width plus 2 times length times height plus 2 times width times height. So we had the L variable for length, the W variable for width, and the H variable for height. Now, next let's talk about what an expression is. An expression is made up of one or more numbers, one or more variables, or maybe it has both numbers and variables. So as long as there's a number or a variable, it can be an expression. An expression often includes one or more operations. So the word often, I want you to notice that. It doesn't mean it has to have an operation sign, but it often does. One thing that an expression cannot have, it does not include an equal sign. That is so very important to remember. Expressions, it's just a fancy word for a math problem, right? An expression is a math problem usually. But it cannot have an equal sign. If it has an equal sign, we wouldn't call it an expression, we would call it an equation. Because think about it, the word equation, in the beginning, it almost looks like equal. All you're missing is an L. So an equal sign would be in an equation. If it doesn't have an equal sign, it would probably be an expression. Some examples of expressions are shown below. Well, look at this, the number 4. That's it, just the number 4. That is actually considered an expression because it's got one or more numbers. Done. It fits that criteria, and there's no equal sign. Variable, the variable n. It can include one or more variables. So n, just by itself, n, that's an expression. X minus 9. There is another expression. It includes a number and a variable and an operation sign. 3z. Well, that's 3 times z. Remember, if we don't see that operation sign in the middle, it probably means multiplication. Usually when you have a number and a variable right next to each other, there's multiplication going on. That's 3 times z. So we have a number, we have a variable, there's your expression. B plus 2 minus a. We've got 2 variables, we've got 1 number, we've got 2 operation signs, that's an expression. And 1/2 base times height, there's another expression. For number 2, we're going to circle the expression. So let's see, p divided by 7, that counts. We've got a number, we've got a variable, we have an operation sign. 13, that counts. It's just a number, but that still works. This next one, z equals 6 minus x times y, not an expression because it has that equal sign. We cannot include it as an expression if it has an equal sign. T, yep, that works. 7 plus 4 equals 11? Nope, there's an equal sign. And 0.5 or 1/2 times the sum of k and s, Yep, that works. That's an expression. We're going to write an expression that includes at least one number, at least one variable, and at least one operation. I'm going to give you some examples, but I want you to try to come up with one on your own. Let's see, at least one number, 5. At least one variable, okay, m. And at least one operation, let's add them. There's an expression that has a number, a variable, and at least one operation. Try to come up with one on your own. And next on page 165, we're going to talk about what terms are. This is really important. This is what our main essential question is all about. Terms are parts of an expression that are added or subtracted. Basically, addition and subtraction signs are going to separate the terms in an expression. Take a look at these examples. Y plus 9. There's two terms there. Y on its own is a term. 9 on its own is a term, and they're being separated by this addition sign. G minus 2g. G is a term, 2 times g is a term, and they're being separated by this subtraction sign. Even though there's multiplication going on here, 2 times g, that whole thing, 2g, is one term because only addition and subtraction signs are going to separate the terms. Multiplication and division signs do not separate them. Look at this last one, 3/4 a plus b minus 1. 3/4 a, even though that's multiplication, that whole thing is one term. B, that's one term, and 1, that's one term, and they're being separated by that addition and that subtraction sign. So there's 3 terms in that expression. So for number 4, we're going to write an expression that consists of 2 terms that are numbers. They just want numbers, no variables. So, okay, how about 3 plus 2? Done. There's an expression. There's 2 terms, 3 and 2, and they're being separated by an addition sign. Notice there's no equal sign. Remember, expressions cannot have equal signs. You can try to come up with one on your own if you'd like. It doesn't have to be an addition sign separating them. Remember, you can also have subtraction. Number 5, write an expression that consists of 3 terms. Okay, you can make this very simple. You can make it all numbers, 5 plus 4 minus 3. That's an expression with 3 terms being separated by this addition and this subtraction. Maybe you want to include variables. Let's see, a minus 2 times b plus 7. There's an expression with 3 terms. A is a term, 2 times b is a term, and 7 is a term, and they're being separated by an addition and subtraction sign. If you want, you can get fancy. Let's see, I can do 5 times the sum of a plus b minus 7a to the second power plus, we'll go with 24. There's 3 terms there, believe it or not. I know it looks really big, but there are really 3 terms there. 24 is a term. 7 times a to the second power, that's a term. And 5 times the sum of a and b, that whole thing is actually a term as well. And you're probably thinking, but wait a minute, Miss Sexton, how come there's an addition sign there? How can that be a term? Well, remember, this 5 is multiplying, put my little multiplication symbol there, this 5 is multiplying everything that's in the parentheses. So that whole term is actually a product. It's 5 times a plus b. It's 5 times the answer of a plus b. So that whole thing is one term, and it's being separated with the other terms by this subtraction sign. And of course, this addition sign is separating the other ones as well. So you can get fancy. You don't have to. Now, something that's not in your workbook, but I want you to know, we're going to talk about coefficients and negative coefficients. A coefficient is basically the number that multiplies the variable, or sometimes product of variables. So for example, if I say 5a, you know that's 5 times a. This 5 here is your coefficient because that's the number that's multiplying the variable. What if I said 6 times a to the third power? This 6 is your coefficient because it's the number that's multiplying the variable a to the third power. Or maybe you want 24 times x times y times z. Well, 24 is still the coefficient because it's multiplying this product of variables. It's multiplying not just one variable, it's multiplying all of these variables that are being multiplied. And we use the word product for multiplication. So 24 times x times y times z, 24 is your coefficient. Now, when following a subtraction sign, the coefficient is actually negative. Now, let me give you an example. Let's say you have $0 in your bank account. And then you have to take away, X number of dollars to, to buy something. That X is actually going to be considered a negative X, believe it or not. You might have to take out $5 from the bank account. Well, if you started out with 0 and you're taking away 5, that means you have negative $5 there. That's because when you have a number following a subtraction sign, it's also the same as having that negative number. So if I gave you an expression like, erase that a little bit better. If I gave an expression like, 5 minus 3n. That's an expression. I've got two terms, but my two terms are being separated by this subtraction sign. That means my coefficient 3 is actually a negative 3. So negative 3 is the coefficient because it followed a subtraction sign. What if I have, 2x minus 3y? Well, again, negative 3 is going to be the coefficient. That's because it's following the subtraction sign. What if I have 2 minus, let's do z, 2 minus z. Well, guess what? That means that negative 1z, or negative 1, is your coefficient. I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but if you are just given a variable like, let's go with m. It actually always has a coefficient of 1 in front. Any variable a to z will have a coefficient of 1 in front if you don't see any other number there. Think of this as 1 times m, meaning you only have 1m. 1 is the coefficient. If I gave you the variables, m, n, and o, well, guess what? They have a coefficient of 1 in front of them. I just don't always need to write it in, but it's there. So back to this problem, if I have 2 minus z, that's actually 2 minus 1z, and that means my coefficient is a negative 1. Okay, let's look at our takeaways. So we have the different definitions and examples for variable, for an expression, for terms, and for a coefficient. And also just keep in mind, when following a subtraction sign, your coefficient is actually going to be negative.